Jensen here. Today we are going to make some waffles with sourdough discard, cinnamon apple spice compote with scrambled eggs and sausages, and then we're going to prep some tortillas for tonight's dinner. Let's start by making our batter for our waffles. We're going to start with all the wet ingredients first. We need 1.5 cups of milk. I'm using whole milk. And then we need 2 cups of sourdough discard. So it doesn't have to be active. I'll give mine a little stir because I had a little bit of a hooch on the top. And we need 2 full cups of this. So 1 and 2. I will say waffles are a great recipe if you have a lot of discard you need to use up. It's one of the few recipes that actually uses a lot. There we go. So we've got our 2 cups of sourdough discard. And we are going to add in 1/2 cup of melted butter. And I'm going to give this a quick little stir up just to make sure it gets all kind of diluted together. And there we go. And now we're going to put in 4 eggs. This is what's going to help give our waffles their kind of little bounce. So 2, 3, and 4. And we're also going to add in our vanilla. So we're going to add in 2 teaspoons of vanilla. One, 2. We're going to give this a nice mix up until all of those eggs are mixed into it. Once we add the flour in, we want to minimize our mixing as much as possible. So I always like to make sure I mix up all of my wet ingredients fairly well. There we go. And you're just mixing until they're all completely incorporated. Perfect. And now we're going to add our salt and our baking powder. Just going to dry out my table measure so my baking powder doesn't stick to this. But we need 2 teaspoons of baking powder and 2 teaspoons of salt. So let's start with our salt. 1, 2, and then 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And make sure you use baking powder, not baking soda. Otherwise, your muffins will be really poofy. And then muffins, waffles. Okay, and then we're going to add in some sugar. We're going to add about 3 tablespoons of sugar. Now, most of the sweetness for our waffles are going to come from our compote or the syrup we use. So they're not super sweet, but that's good because otherwise, if they make them too sugary, then it'll be overload with your syrup or the top. And we're going to give this a good mix in until it's all the way incorporated. Make sure there are no lumps of the baking powder in there. There we go. And you can even be like, when you put your baking powder in there, it reacts with the sourdough discard and it starts to bubble up, which is going to give you that nice, light and crispy waffles. I don't know why I keep calling them muffins today. And then we're going to add in 2 cups of all-purpose flour. So we've got 1, and 2. And then we're going to mix these until they are just barely combined. You don't want to over mix them because you want to have kind of fluffy waffles. There we go. So I'm going to mix them. They'll still be lumpy, but until when I don't see any like dry flour at the top. There we go. So we have our nice lumpy waffle batter here. Using our butter or our sourdough discard, I'm going to get a spatula and just kind of scrape these around the edges. But you see how it's nice and thick and lumpy? That's what you want. Don't over mix it because you want a nice, really fluffy waffle. We're going to let our waffle mix sit for just a few seconds. It's best if you let it sit for like a minute or two to really have those, like the baking powder react with it. It gives an even nice fluffier one. So while those are resting and our waffle iron is heating up, we are going to prep our apples for our spice compote. So I've got 3 apples here. Now, Granny Smith is typically like the best for an apple compote because they're really tart, but we're using some Honeycrisp and we're going to add a little bit of fresh lemon juice to it to help bring in that tartness, as long as some sugar and some cinnamon. So I'm just going to get all these peels off of our apples because we don't want those in there. I find apple peels always just are chewy, so make sure you peel them up. It really does make a big difference. Here, and then I'm just going to core them out, and I just use my paring knife here. This is a serrated paring knife, and you just kind of guide it along the curves of the apple. And I will say, if you don't have the knives that you need for your kitchen, you need a good chef knife and a good paring knife. And if you have those 2 knives, you can pretty much prep anything. I know you can get like the set that has all the different types of knives in it, like the fish knife and whatnot. But really, the only 2 that you truly need is a nice chef knife and a paring knife. And I've had these knives. I got them actually for a wedding gift. They were part of a knife block set. So I've had them for 16, 17 years now. They have lasted forever. They're the Wusthof. So I will say they were good quality, but I have not had to replace them. So I feel like they definitely were worth their money from my siblings who spent them on them to give them to me as a wedding gift. Here we go. Now our mix looks like it's nice and good. So I'm going to just take a break from peeling these, and we're going to put our first bit in. So let me grab my little cup because it's easier to put it in. So I've got my waffle iron. It is nice and hot and ready. So it is ready to use. And because we have a lot of butter in here, we don't necessarily need to grease up our waffle iron. And I'm just going to scoop it in. Now the trick is to make sure you don't put too much in so it doesn't overflow. So I kind of just make a big blob in the middle. And then as it heats up, it will melt the butter and it will spread out. And then I'm going to push start. So mine takes about 3 minutes on each side. And then we're going to flip it and do 2. So this is a nice one because you can do 2 big Belgian waffles at a time. But this also works in a traditional waffle maker that doesn't make the big ridge ones. There we go. And flip. It's like one of those, I call it my hotel waffle maker because I feel like every time you go to a hotel, they have these little waffle makers there and the cups of waffle mix that you can make your own waffles. But they're delicious. Here we go. We're going to finish up cutting up these apples for our cinnamon apple compote, and then we're going to get them in our saucepan to start getting nice and soft and tender. So just 1 more half. And these are I think these are Honeycrisp apples, so they're a little bit sweeter, so we won't need to add quite as much sugar when we're making our compote with them. But if you're using like Granny Smith apples, which are a bit more tart, you'd want to add about a cup of sugar. We're going to add maybe 2/3 just because these are a tad bit sweeter. Okay, we've got our apple peels. All good. And it's a personal preference. I like to take the apple peels off because they're really chewy, but if you don't mind them, you can always keep them on. And we're just gonna do kind of a loose chop on these. You don't want your apple pieces too big because you do want them to kind of go nicely in each little bite on your waffle. And I like to do compotes with my waffles versus mixing it in, because I find sometimes when you mix like fresh ingredients into your waffles, they don't cook up as nice. Like a blueberry will burst and then add extra liquid to it. So I like to make little compotes that you can dress on top of your waffle. And it's also nice for when you have people who maybe don't want a blueberry waffle. Well, they can have a plain one without the compote or an apple spice one. A lot of my kids will some of them will eat it together, and some of them will eat the apple spice by themselves, and they'll eat the waffle by themselves. So it makes them more versatile. Here we go. And so you're just wanting to do a nice small kind of cut on here because you want them to cook up kind of quickly while we're making our waffles. Because that's the beauty about breakfast foods. You can typically have a nice big brunch kind of prepped in less than 30 minutes with lots of components because nothing is really takes a long time. Okay, so we've got our apples here all chopped up. We're going to put them in our little sauce pot here.
You have a question. Do you ever add apple jam to the compote?
Ooh, I've never done that before. That'd probably be really delicious. I'll have to try the next time. I don't, but I will add a little bit of cornstarch to thicken it up. Let's check on our waffles here. Beautiful. We've got our first one done. Nice. I'm going to take my fork out. And then we're going to add our next batch in here. And my waffle batter is a bit thicker because I like to use butter versus oil. Now, if you use oil, it will be a little bit more runny, but I just find that butter makes baked goods taste better. I'm going to put it, there you have a timer on here. So it's about 3 minutes for each one. Beautiful. But these are really big waffles. So one waffle feeds like 2 to 3 people because they're those true Belgian waffles. Okay. We've got our burner over here. I'm going to take my lemon here. We're going to cut it down and we're going to squeeze some fresh lemon juice into it. This is going to add a bit of tartness. There we go. I always like to add fresh lemon juice to mine because I feel like it really brings out the apple flavor. Got it going on high. We're going to add a little bit of sugar.
Yeah, question. What brand of waffle iron is
that? That is I believe it's a KitchenAid. Yes, a KitchenAid Pro line on here. Let's see if you can see it right there. I've had this KitchenAid forever. So at least 10 years, maybe longer. So I don't know if they have that exact one in it, but I know that it's just like a typical Belgian waffle maker.
And you have another question. Do you add lemon if it's Granny Smith apples?
So it depends. If my Granny Smith apples are dry, I'll add a bit of lemon to it. But if they are nice and wet, I won't, because they are tartar. So I put a squeeze of there, and then I put 2/3 because they're sweeter ones. I'm going to put about a tablespoon of cinnamon, so you can get that nice kind of spiciness to it. And let's get my spatula here. I'm going to just stir them up. And then what we'll do is once the apples are started to sweat out their natural liquid, I'll put a little bit of butter in here. And then, of course, we'll toss them with a little bit of cornstarch to make a little slurry. That will give you more of, instead of a runny apple like liquid juice, it's a little bit more gelatinous, which will cling to your waffles better. Okay. So I will say the lemon juice, if you're not using a Granny Smith, really gives you that tart one. But sometimes if your apples are dry because they're a little bit older, you want to put just a little bit in there to help them sweat out a bit faster. Okay. We're going to get our sausages cooking up, and we'll get our scrambled eggs here in just a second. But I always wait on my scrambled eggs towards the very end because you don't want them to get cold. We've got our waffle maker here. Nice. We reset the timer. Beautiful. I'm going to fill this guy. I think I'll have enough to make maybe one more after this. We'll see. It'll probably be a small one. This makes about 5 waffles. And I just use my fork to kind of pop them up. And then let's see what we can get out of here. It's going to start by filling up 1 quadrant of our waffle maker here. Okay, we'll probably get a half a waffle on this side. So I don't want any of it to go to waste. Now we're feeding, 7 people today, so this is enough waffles for us. It's probably more than most people. So you could easily, I double my waffle mix just because we are feeding a large amount. Here we go.
Other people could have it.
Yeah, you could have it. And so, and that would make probably 2 really big. I'm going to show you. These are really big waffles. Now, like some people probably eat one on their own. I will say my teenage boy who loves waffles, he eats about 2 or 3/4 of one because they are nice and big. We're going to pop some sausages into our thing to saute up. The bag never likes to open for me. There we go.
What type of cutting board do you like to use?
I like to use, well, it depends on what I'm cutting up. So for breads, I like to use wooden cutting boards. For meats and a lot of my vegetables, I like to use these really big, it's plastic, they're really big because I can really disinfect them well. And then for like small, I have small ones, which are just any one I grab. But I have a variety. I have like 20 different cutting boards. My biggest thing is I like really big cutting boards. I hate small ones. So I have like one really big wooden one, and I have this really big plastic one, and then I have a bunch of smaller ones. But I find for meats and certain things, gotta really scrub it in there because it's hard to disinfect them. And then for breads, I like wood because they cut, like I can cut into it nicer, especially with sourdough because it's really thick. But they're hard to wash. So that's why breads, I don't mind because it's pretty simple cleanup. Let's get our thing. We've got a nice kind of bubble going on here. You can see it's kind of sweated out some nice juice in there from the apples as well. I'm going to put in about a teaspoon of butter. And this is just going to work when we add that cornstarch. It's just going to give it kind of a really nice kind of gel, like a richer gel on it versus in just using the straight up juice. Give this a nice stir. Okay, let's check on our waffles over here. This one I think needs a little bit more because you see how it's still a little pale right here. So we're going to give it about 30 seconds more. Okay, we're going to move this to the side. And we are going to, while our things are cooking up here, we are going to prep our tortillas for tonight's dinner. I like to make them using our sourdough discard and let them sit on the counter because then they really like hydrate well. And this is a great way to use up a lot of starter. And they're super simple. Let me grab my oil and my water. Okay. We've got 2/3 cup of water. I'm going to put it in my bowl. I'm going to grab my thing for my sourdough. Let's take this guy out now. It's been about 30 seconds. Much nicer. Perfect. Look, we got a nice rich golden. Gorgeous. Our waffles are nice and hot. Let me turn this off. Got our sausages. We're almost on the home run stretch. I'm gonna turn on for our eggs. I always like to wait until the very end to cook the eggs because nobody wants cold scrambled eggs. So we've got 2/3 cup of water. We're gonna add 1 cup of sourdough discard. So I've got a little bit left in there. I always have several jars of sourdough discard and sourdough. You don't need a lot of starter to revamp it up. There we go. So we've got 1 cup of discard. And we're going to put a 1/2 cup of oil. So with tortillas, you need kind of a high fat ratio for it. There we go. And they're super simple. Not a lot of ingredients are needed. Let me turn my sausages down. We're getting a nice kind of browning on them. Perfect. And we've got a lovely bubble on our compote for our spiced apples. There we go. I'm going to just turn my back one down to low. We want to make sure our apples get cooked all the way so they're nice and tender. And then we're going to add in some salt. We need about 2 teaspoons of salt, and then flour. And this is all that you put in your tortillas. So it's a super simple recipe, but homemade tortillas are the best. And then we're going to put in, let me mix this up. That way it gets all the way mixed around. And then we're going to add 3 1/3 cup of flour. But right before we do that, let's get our eggs cooking so that we can serve up breakfast in like 3 to 4 minutes. Now, when I make scrambled eggs, I never scramble them in a bowl. I just scramble them in the pan. Saves you a dish. There we go. And my kids this is their preferred way of having eggs. They love scrambled eggs. I do have one daughter who, like me, likes a fried egg. But when the other 5 like scrambled, that's typically what we get. Okay. Perfect. And let me take my spatula here. And then what I do, I'm just going to go through and poke every yolk. And then we do a crisp scramble while the pan is not super hot. And it just saves you a dish. There we go. And so we've got scrambling up our eggs here. Beautiful. And now I'm going to turn them down to about a medium low because you want to go low and slow with your scrambled eggs. If you cook them too high, they're going to stick to your pan, and then they're going to just burn up and get dry eggs. So low and slow for a nice, soft, fluffy ones. If you like rich eggs, add an extra yolk and you'll get a really rich one. If you like them extra fluffy, add a tablespoon of water or a tablespoon of milk and you'll get really fluffy eggs, like a restaurant-style eggs. So we just kind of do the regular plain Jane, but I do like, my mother-in-law loves fluffy eggs, so I'll add milk into it when I do there. And my mom loves really rich eggs, so she gets an extra yolk. So, it's just to each personal preference. Now we're going to add 3 1/3 cup of all-purpose flour to our batter for our tortillas. And then mix that up, and that will hydrate, and this will be our dough for our tortillas later today for dinner. We're probably going to do some like chicken tacos or whatnot. Then I'm going to use my dough whisk here and whisk it up and let it hydrate. We'll do a whisk and stir. There we go. I will say if you are doing like eggs, non-stick pan is where you want to be at, because otherwise you've got to really make sure your pan is nice and hot and oiled for it to not stick to it. But we've got these Hexclad pans, and so far they're my favorite pans for cooking eggs. Even we've done the Cuisinart non-stick and the Calphalon non-stick, and they just never work. They always were sticking to it. These clean up pretty good.
You have a question. At what age did you start to cook?
I started to cook when I was in 7th grade, so about 13. So I've been cooking here for a long time. So what, 20, 25 years, almost 25 years. Here we go. Get our eggs. A nice little scramble here. Beautiful. Okay. These will be done in about a minute. And then we'll make our little slurry here. And then we'll knead our dough and breakfast will be served. Okay, so we're going to shake in about a teaspoon of cornstarch. This is going to give you that nice kind of apple pie filling texture to it. Makes it a little bit gelatinous. You want your things to be nice and hot, and you want to really sprinkle it over the top here because you don't want it to come into a big chunk. And what happens is when cornstarch with the heat, when it activates, it becomes a gel. And this is called making it a slurry, where you toss your fruit with the cornstarch. But you can see how it's got a nice kind of thick cinnamon sugar gel now with it. And it's just absolutely lovely on top of our waffles. So I'm going to turn the heat off of that. Beautiful. We are just about done. I'm going to remove the heat. We've got our shag dough for our tortilla. And this is actually a really malleable dough. So what we do is we're just going to turn it out into our thing, and about a few seconds of kneading while our eggs are sitting and kind of doing their steam cook off. I like to cook my scrambled eggs right before they're done, and then I turn the heat off and I let them kind of steam off for about a minute, because that allows them to fully cook without getting dry. It's really easy to overcook eggs, and so that's always been my method to keep them nice and moist instead of drying. So here, we've got a nice knead into our tortilla dough. And I will say, once you've made the convert to like homemade tortillas, it's so hard to buy store-bought ones, especially since they're so easy to use. And there we go. You see how it just kneads together? And then those of you who were here when we made the dough, tortilla dough is kind of a high-fat dough. So the ratio with fat to water and flour is much higher than anything else, because when you cook this up on a skillet, you don't add any extra butter or oil. It just cooks up naturally on its own. But here, do you see how we've got this beautiful mound of tortillas? And this is going to make about 10 to 12 tortillas, depending on what size I want to make. Okay. Looks like we've got our delicious compote here. Our eggs are ready, so we can plate up our breakfast here. Okay. Let me get a spoon. Make this a little bit easier. Okay. So let's find a nice one for our video. There we go. So look at our beautiful homemade waffles using sourdough discard. And then, of course, we're going to heap them with our delicious apple compote that has nice like cinnamon, sugar, lemon juice, just really happy, bright, just kind of a rich, almost makes you feel like you're having an apple pie for breakfast. And of course, we're going to have some scrambled eggs on the side and some sausages. So pretty easy, pretty quick breakfast for our family today, but everyone will be happy because they love our waffles made with our sourdough discard. And who doesn't love a great apple compote? Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, show you what we're cooking, what we're making for our family. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And again, thanks so much for being here with us today.